Okay, this next section will require knowledge of the program Hammer, which is part of the Source Software Development Kit. If you don't know anything about that program, you're either going to have to skip this part or else pick up a copy of the choreography guide that's meant to complement this. You really should treat this next section as an expansion to the choreography guide. For what it's worth, this is the only part of this guide that you'll need to have knowledge of Hammer or any other part of the software development kit for. If you want to know what you're missing, what I'm going to teach here is how to attach a camera to an object in the map or view the world through the eyes of an NPC. I didn't even use this method when creating Galaxy Gulp. Everything you see in there was created using Demo Smoother and still shots, but this method can still be useful for some situations. Okay, if you're still with me, go ahead and open up the Source SDK. I'm going to hit the ground running with this and act like you've already watched the choreography guide, so you've been warned. First, go and fire up Hammer. We're going to open up the same version of the map we've been doing all the demo work in. There's one entity in particular that adds some additional functionality to camera work that you can't get with Demo Smoother. Alright, once it's up, go to File, Open. We're going to go to that same directory I won't shut up about. C Drive, Program Files, Steam, Steam Apps, your Steam username, Half-Life 2 Episode 1, Episodic, and for this one, Maps. Then open up ggfight.vmf. Open. Alright, once that's up, you can get a view of what's happening in the map. This is a different map, but all this stuff should look familiar if you've gone through the choreography guide. If this isn't familiar, you shouldn't be watching this part in the first place. In which case, you're just sneaking into this section like a miner waving a fake ID so he can get into a bar. Anyway, for those of you that belong here, what I thought I'd do for this first shot is make it look like we're looking at the world through the fight guy's eyes. So we'll get to see him run out the store, stop, then run towards the end of the map. So the first thing we're going to do is go straight to the Entity tool. The entity we're going to be interested in for this section is a point view control. So let's select that off to the side here. Now place it anywhere in your map. For this first shot, where you place it doesn't matter, although its orientation does. Go and select it in the wireframe view over here, then rotate it so it's facing the same direction as the fight guy here. Now double click on it. Now before we go any further, I need to warn you that like many other aspects of camera work in the Source engine, this entity is bugged. I've seen all sorts of strange things happen with this entity, so I only use it when I have a definite need for it. The examples I'm going to show you in this section will work, but I can't promise what will happen if you stray off the beaten path. I plan to cover the various bugs as I go, but there's always something to surprise me. For example, in one test I did, I found the camera worked perfectly the first time I ran it in a map, then every time I ran it afterwards, it would face 90 degrees away in the wrong direction, and I still don't know why. That won't happen in this particular demonstration, and hopefully it won't happen to you. But just be aware we're getting into some uncharted territory here. Okay, the first entry that's important is the name. I'll just call this camera. The next important entry is parent. Since we're going to be viewing the world through the eyes of an NPC, we want the parent to be the NPC himself. You'll see in a second here, the name of our NPC is Fight Guy. Okay, entity to look at. Here's our first bugged function. It will not be the last. Now you can probably guess what this does. It acts similar to a target in Demo Smoother, something that the camera should be looking at. This only partially works in Hammer. If you specify an entity for the camera to look at, the camera will in fact look at it. However, it will be slow about it. For example, I tried to recreate that shot we did in Demo Smoother, where the fight guy runs right by the camera using only the view control here, telling it to follow him as an entity. Well, the camera was about 2 to 3 seconds behind the entire time, making it completely impractical. If this had been a real cameraman, I would have suspected him of aiming the camera with one hand and eating nachos with the other. So you can use this function, but you're simply better off using targets in Demo Smoother. The next entry, target attachment name, is just an extension of the previous function. So if you want a delayed shot of looking at someone's head instead of their torso, there you go. Hold time. Okay, this one is an enigma to me. What this supposedly does is tell the camera how long to take the view away from the player and give it to the camera. When I was testing, I found most of the time this doesn't do anything. And now I question whether I was just going crazy, but there were 1 or 2 times when it did work. Since I wasn't able to get it to work reliably, I recommend leaving it alone. When I do that, it seems to interpret 10 seconds as an infinite amount of time. Also, like the description says, there's a flag you can check to enable an infinite amount of time, but I don't trust that either. If you want your camera to hold the shot for a specific amount of time, there's another way to do this that's more reliable that I'll cover in a little bit. For now, I recommend just leaving this value alone and assuming your hold time will be infinite. Okay, path corner. In theory, I'm guessing this is how you tell your camera to follow a specific path, like a walk path or a train track. In practice, this doesn't really work as advertised. I'll show you what it does do as part of this section. It's not especially helpful, but I like to prove that I'm not making these things up. If you want your camera to follow a specific path, then your best option is to use Demo Smoother. It will save you a lot of pain. For now, leave this blank. Okay, next value. Interpolate position to player. This really doesn't have much use in Machinima. This would be more for someone creating a playable mod who wanted to show a transition to a cutscene or something. So just leave it on no. Okay, initial speed, acceleration, and stop deceleration, we'll talk about in a little bit. For now, just ignore these values. Now let's head over to flags. The first thing you want to do here is uncheck the default options of Start at Player and Follow Player. These will only cause problems when using this entity for camera work. Now you can try checking infinite hold time, but I really don't trust that, and that's what it seems to be at by default. So I'd go ahead and leave all this blank. Now go ahead and hit Apply, then Close. Okay, we'll be looking through the eyes of our NPC here, Fight Guy. You can see his name if you click on him. So we need a way to make the camera use his view. Now you might think parenting the camera to him would be enough and you could simply adjust the view manually. Well, this does work, and it's a good option for trains and other moving objects, but not NPCs. We would only be attaching the camera to his body itself. So it would still move where he went, but it wouldn't look the direction he's looking, bob up and down the same way, etc. We'll want to add an extra step. Go and select the Entity tool. And the entity we'll want is a Logic Auto. Then place it anywhere in the map. Now go to the Select tool and double-click on it. And head over to Outputs. Click on Add, and our first command will be On-Map Spawn. Our target entity is Camera. Via this input, set parent attachment. And the attachment point we want is Eyes. Then click Apply. Now I already knew the attachment point ahead of time. If you forgot how to find that out, consult the choreography guide. There's a section in there where I use the model viewer to list all of your model's attachments. Okay, now this is all we need to do here. But for future reference, if you're using the Episode 1 engine or later, you can select the Set Parent Attachment Maintain Offset option. And it will do the same thing, except remember your camera's position in space relative to your attachment point. But we're already set to look through his eyes, so we won't need that for this demonstration. Now go ahead and hit Apply, then Close. If you want to use the camera tool for a minute, you can see about what his path will look like. He's going to run out the store here, stop for a second, then run along this entire path until he gets to the lamppost. Now what we need is a way to activate this. So head back over to the player spawn area. Then use the Select tool to double-click on the trigger I have set in front of the spawn. Now go to Outputs, and you can see some of the values I already have set here. These send the Fight Guy and the cop running when you walk over it. We're going to create a new one, so click on Add. And we want On Trigger, Target Entity Camera, then Enable. And Apply, then Close. Now it's set to steal our view away once we walk over this target. So it's kind of like we're possessing the body of that Fight Guy. Really, if we wanted, we can make his eyes roll into the back of his head too. But that'd be beyond the scope of this lesson. Alright, remember how I said your camera is set to take away your view for an infinite amount of time, even though we didn't check that box? Well, I meant it. We need a way to tell the camera to release the view after our Fight Guy is done running. So let's head back over to the end of his running path, and we'll use a trick that was already covered in the choreography guide. Go and double click on the last path corner here. Now go to Outputs and click on Add. Now type in On Pass, Target Entity Camera, and the command we want is Disable. Then hit Apply and Close. Now this camera shot is good to go. All we have to do is run the map. But as a bonus, I thought I'd show you what happens when you try and use path corners like the feature mentioned earlier. I thought one neat shot for this would be to have the camera pan along the front of the store sign. So let's go and set that up. First, go to the Entity tool, as we're going to create a second point view control. Now go ahead and place it near the sign. Unlike our last camera, the position of this one will matter. So let's go ahead and adjust it in the wireframe view here. Okay, I'm going to move it back away from the sign. Then click on it once so I can use the corners to rotate it. Or it can just deselect itself every time I try and click on it. Now I want to go to a different axis view so I can raise the height. And finally, I'll move it off to the side here. Okay, now our camera's in position. So let's make our supposed flight path. I say that because the camera seems to ignore the path after the first point, but I'll go through the motions anyway. You can use either path corners or path tracks. I've had the same results with both. I'll use a path corner for this one. So go and select one of those in the Entity tool, then place it somewhere near the camera. If it'll stick to anything, that is. There we go. Okay, now go back to the Select tool and adjust the position of this in the wireframe view like we did with the point view control. We're going to want this located right next to the camera. And before we make the rest of the corners, double click on this so we can give it a name. I'm going to call this Cam Path. Then hit Apply and Close. And another refresher, simply hold down Shift to create the rest of the corners on your path. I'm convinced the point view control will ignore this, but I'll try it anyway. There's one path corner. And there's another. Notice how I have it set to stop once it gets to the end of the sign. Alright, we have a simple path. Now we need to set the values for our camera itself. Go ahead and double click on the point view control. Now give it a different name. I'll call this one Camera 2. We can skip a lot of these values after that. Path corner. We'll want to specify that one. Our value here is Cam Path, the first point on our path. We can ignore interpolate position. The next value we care about is initial speed. This is the speed our camera will take off at along our path. Now when I was testing this, I found that the speed values were similar to those used by other objects like trains or dynamic props, except they were off by a factor of 10. For example, a speed of 150 is about a walking pace. So if you want that speed for this camera, we'll have to enter in 1500. Finally, as for acceleration and stop acceleration, in theory, this could be used to accelerate or decelerate your camera by a given amount, but in practice, they cause the camera to act totally unpredictably. I advise against using these values at all. Let's let sleeping dogs lie here. Alright, now go to Flags, and like before, uncheck the two default values. Then hit Apply and Close. And you know what? I changed my mind. Let's change the course of this path so I can show you how obvious it is that the camera will disregard it. Instead of telling it to stop at the sign, let's make it back up away from the sign once it reaches the midway mark. So I'll just drag this path corner over here. Now we have an L-shaped flight path for it to follow. Okay, now it's set up to run the second camera and fly along that path. Or try to, anyway. We just need a way to activate this. We don't want this starting before the first camera view is finished, so let's head back over to that end path corner and use it to time this correctly. Go and double click on the path corner, then go to Outputs again. And we want to add a new output. On Pass, Entity Camera 2, we want to enable. And I'll hit Apply. Oh, and to make sure this behaves properly, it's not a bad idea to add a small delay to this second camera. If we have it occur at the same time the old one disables, it can lead to erratic behavior. I'll add just a second delay here, then hit Apply. Now it will follow the fight guy, give us our original view for a second, then cut to the camera panning along the sign. And we're set to run this.